Google is also going to be laying off more people.
Tesla has laid off thousands of employees.
Amazon employees are walking off the job right now in Seattle.
Actually, hundreds, thousands of jobs this year, just in April alone. Some of the world's biggest companies, including Tesla, Google, and Apple, collectively cut over 20,000 jobs.
You know, I have bills. I have a life, actually, outside of work, and that's what they never understood.
I wrote about tech job layoffs back in 2017. We are unfortunately going to see even more layoffs, and they're gonna accelerate. Let me explain why this is happening. I started my career in tech back in the 2000s, a few years after the tech bubble burst last time. I've not only been in tech for 20 years, but back in 2017 I wrote a book warning about the coming housing collapse. I wrote it about Norway, but the same thing applies globally, and what industries will get hit by the collapse. And I quote, "The advertising industry / tech industry. The advertising industry has experienced great growth since the 90s because Norwegians consume and it's easy to sell goods to Norwegians. When the housing bubble bursts, Norwegians will stop consuming and start saving. It will probably not be so easy to save since they have to get rid of the debt first. It won't be so easy to do when the housing falls as much as I think they will. I feel sorry for all my colleagues who have taken off large loans to buy a home. I've tried to warn them, many of them, against buying a home. But I've noticed they just start avoiding me and think that I'm negative. So I stopped talking about it and instead wrote a book. When I wrote the book, I never imagined that tech would grow to this level and hire this many people. We're in another bubble. This one is huge, much bigger than the one in the 2000s. What is a bubble? It's a sector that is overinflated, popular, hype, just like the housing bubble 2008.
Closures are rising, and the biggest problem is that prices continue to drop. Until home prices stop falling, things just aren't going to get any better.
Eventually, this will happen to the tech sector. Here's a tech worker who has a PhD in software engineering. Explains what's happening in the tech world.
An article that you wrote, I believe in March, and it's called, "I've been employed in tech for years, but I've almost never worked." The 5 months of working as a software developer for a distinguished investment bank, you worked only 3 hours total in 5 months. Total. Can you explain why tech employees are among the highest paid professionals while basically doing nothing?
Let's make it clear that it has happened a lot, but it's not just me. I got to this point of landing job after job on projects where there was nothing to do, not even if I tried to do something. So I got this job for this famous investment bank, and for 3 months at first, they didn't even assign me to a project where I was being paid a good 6-figure salary for absolutely no work. And then in the other 3 months, the work was very, very meaningless, and everybody decided that my tasks were, this is a 2-week job, but it's rewriting 2 paragraphs. I can do it in 10 minutes. But then everybody agreed, no, it's really big. And then I noticed everyone's doing this. It's all overblown. And if it was the first time this happened to me, it could be an exception, but it's happened a little bit too much. Then I started speaking with people and noticing that a lot of people I know were in the same situation. We had this wave of layoffs in tech, including Twitter, which laid off 80% of its workforce, and it's still running. How can a company run with only 20% of the people that used to work there? It's probably because they weren't doing much. There's an epidemic of idleness in the tech field, and it's making a lot of people unhappy because you're paid a lot, but you enter that profession to actually build something, build a product, have fun, and you end up walking around in circles in your apartment pretending that you work.
But can this new AI bubble keep this thing going a bit longer? I think so. The bubble is here already. But how long will this bubble last? The reason it's so big is that the central banks around the world cut rates to 0% and held them there for 15 years, which has fueled consumption and spending in many sectors. Tech, advertising, etc. is one of them. In 1951, Ludwig von Mises wrote, "True, government can reduce the rate of interest rates in the short run. They can issue additional paper money. They can open the way of credit expansion by the banks. They can thus create an artificial boom and the appearance of prosperity. But such a boom is bound to collapse. sooner or later and to bring about the depression. Since we've held rates at so low for such a long time, it has gone on for way longer than I've been expecting. By printing money and cutting rates to zero, they have created a huge credit expansion. And since the tech sector has benefited a lot by this credit expansion, it will also face a lot of issues when this credit expansion ends. Times have been fantastic in the tech sector, but how long will it last? The bigger the boom, the bigger the bust later. The longer it keeps going, the worse it's gonna get later. This can't go on forever. At a certain time it will end. And the bigger the credit expansion, the bigger the recession later.
Tech companies like Meta, Google, and Amazon have been laying off a staggering amount of workers.
Please make sure you don't have a lot of variable debt. And make sure that you can pay off the debt with only one salary. The fixed debt, that is. Because even more layoffs are coming.
Google, within just a couple days of each other, within 48 hours of each other, both announcing they're laying off 12,000 people in Microsoft's case, 10,000 people in Google's case.
What we've done to the economy was a huge mistake. Last 15 years we've lived with record low interest rates cut in 2008. Here's Bert Bernanke who cut the rates.
FOMC has responded aggressively to the weaker outlook for economic activity, having reduced its target for the federal funds rate by 225 basis points since last summer.
Since this guy lowered rates in 2008, we have had record low interest rates, which has fueled consumption and the tech sector. So now the rates are up almost at 7%. So they're probably gonna keep them there for a while before they start cutting again. Because we have record debts globally, and with the high interest rates you're gonna see a recession just because it costs more to borrow money and the debt payments go up. As Mises said, central banks can manipulate interest rates, but eventually the market will take over. So let's see what Emmanuel thinks of why this is happening. I'm very proud of him understanding what interest rates does to the economy.
I thought it couldn't last too long. I thought something's going on here that's very strange that's driving this. You asked the question, I think there's also the question of very low interest rates, free money, borrow free money for projects, also not being able to actually make money from lending your money to others, because that's what happens when you have low interest rates. So you engage in these outlandish projects. Let's shoot for the moon. Let's try to use AI with blockchain and NFTs for something, just in case. Otherwise, we can't really make our money work for us.
Yeah. That's a good point. You saw as the interest rates increased, all of a sudden they laid off a bunch of people at Twitter, and Meta did the same, and Google did the same, and Amazon did the same. They all of them,
Yeah, startups too. It wasn't just the big companies. Startups have.
Aren't you surprised that Mises predicted this in the 1950s? So either you cut rates or you set off a huge recession. They're already cutting.
There's your rate cut. Down from 4% to 375. It's a 25 basis point cut.
We have an entire generation who has never seen high interest rate.
An entire generation of people is about to experience higher interest rates for the first time in their adult lives.
It's so crazy. We have people who have never lived with high interest rates. This is beyond insane.
Interest rates have been at historic lows since the global financial crisis, but they're beginning to creep up.
That she supports the case for a quarter basis cut in Wednesday's meeting, again headed by Jerome Powell.
Eventually, one day, they'll go out and say, we're gonna cut interest rate. Instead of rates going down, they're gonna go higher. This will be the time when all of this manipulation by central bank ends. My favorite investor, Jim Rogers, explains.
Well, before this is over, yes, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime. In 2008, we had a problem because of too much debt. But since 2009, the debt everywhere has skyrocketed. So the next problem has to be the worst in my lifetime, but the debt has gotten so much worse. But having said that, there's a huge amount of pessimism around right now. And normally when there's a lot of pessimism, something happens and people get happy for a short time.
So as Jim says here, we should see some good times. And I'm guessing that good times will be in AI. Maybe it'll be in commodities, but I already see the AI hype going.
It uses AI to bring AI.
So my bet is AI. I highly recommend you read Jim Rogers' books. The links are in the description. So some of the money that's been printed has gone into the Tesla stock. That's why it's overvalued. My theory is that people who work in tech are the ones who are buying Teslas. And as tech people start getting laid off, they should start selling their Teslas and their stock. And this should fall further. I mean, just look at this valuation. It is worth more than all these companies combined. It is insane. I mean, Elon is really the greatest hype machine of all time. Elon has spent a decade pumping up this stock by promising Hyperloop, the Loop, Solar City, SpaceX, Neuralink, full self-driving cars.
Well, now it appears that the video was a sham.
In 2013, he said his money would be first in, it would be the last one out. And then sold the stock at the top, and then bought Twitter. And after that, he destroyed basically the valuation of Twitter. I mean, why does anybody think he's a genius is beyond me.
It's capable of autopilot. Like, so 90% of your miles could be on auto. You know, for sure, highway.
Is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
We're probably only a month away from having autonomous driving, at least for highways and for relatively simple roads.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Can drive autonomously with greater safety than a person right now.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
100 to 200% safer than a person by the end of next year.
Is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
To me, he just looks like a money guy. Just somebody to pump up a stock and then dump it on the poor shareholders. I mean, this used to be illegal, but now everybody's doing it. Remember the NFT craze?
This
That's
is your
mine.
ape. Are we debuting?
It's really cool. Like the hat, the shades.
With sales of NFTs down a whopping 92% since September.
So that's my theory about the tech layoffs, the Tesla bubble, the EV bubble, the bond bubble, the housing bubble. There's so many bubbles around the globe, it is truly mind-blowing. And all of this because we cut rates in 2008 and we held them at historic low interest rates. Basically, we made it free to borrow money. And then we're supposed to be shocked that everybody has been spending way too much and have too much debt. So the central bank spiked the ball at a party and then blamed us for getting drunk, while they spiked the juice and we had no idea there was alcohol inside of it. The central bankers acted insanely irresponsibly, while they should have never cut rates to zero, never. The same thing they did before the housing bubble burst in 2008.
Worst month-to-month drop in existing home sales since they started keeping track in the late 90s.
They lowered rates then, people took up debt, and once you raise rates, the bubble pops. This is very simple, it's not complicated. The central bank is a bunch of useless bureaucrats who know nothing about economics while they try to steer interest rates. That's why we should end the Fed and stop them from ever printing money again. Anybody who prints money should go to jail and be forced to read Ludwig von Mises. If you look back at history, money printing has never worked. Never. So why these people keep doing this is mind-blowing. Haven't they read history? Obviously not. So let's go back to Jim Rogers and see what he says.
We may well have another gigantic rally, but that would probably be the last one if you ask me. Usually at the end of a long bull market, when you have a gigantic rally at the end, it's usually the end. I mean, if you can remember NASDAQ at the end of 1999 and 2000, I mean, it skyrocketed. It's something like doubled in 6 months or something, just as we were about to collapse. This is the way markets work, fortunately or unfortunately. So I just want to point out, when you have a lot of pessimism, start thinking about going to the other side for a while. To repeat about the end of the 1999, 2000, with that beginning of that bear market, it skyrocketed there at the end after a long secular bull market. And then everybody thought, happy days are here again. This is going to go on forever. An interesting sideline, in 1999, I think that was the exact year, The Wall Street Journal, I mean, not some neighborhood newspaper, started using with capital letters the words, the expression, the new economy. Capital N, capital E. This is the way the Wall Street Journal referred to the world. It was the new economy, capital N, capital E. They don't do it anymore, by the way. That's not a bubble. The price of silver is down 70% from its all-time high. Those are not bubble kind of numbers. So the only thing that is cheap that I know of, I mean, yes, there's property some places, yes, blah, blah, but the only thing as a class are real assets. And they do go up when there's a lot of money printing. And so if people know about real assets, maybe they should do more research and homework. And maybe that's a way to protect yourself.
Jim Rogers is truly one of my favorite investors. So what do you think? Are we gonna see a gigantic AI bubble or are we gonna see a commodity bubble? If you like this channel, you become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something.